Thanks for joining us, Rajoshi and Shiv.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
Yeah, welcome and thanks for joining us this morning. And Happy New Year. Hope you all had a great start to the year. As you probably have got a good overview of what we've been doing at Arka Venture Labs, a lot of these startups basically go through the journey that you have been. You've been able to raise a growth round of financing. You're able to secure an exit in the case of Shiv. So I wanted to talk about that journey, and break it down into various stages of this journey, and get our audience to hear about, what you guys went through. And when I was thinking through this, when I was looking through my journey also, as I was in a startup, at all times, one thing that we struggled with is we always had a huge volume of work and so little time. It was always disproportionate. So what was very important was focus, right? And focus at every aspect of the journey. So I thought I will kind of structure this conversation around this topic of focus. By nature, startup is extremely resource constrained. The last thing it needs is, to spread itself even thinner than what it already is. And as you guys both building cross-border companies, this gets even more complicated, getting everyone to focus. So I wanted to hear from your own words. Maybe, first kick off with an introduction about yourself, but also talk about those early days. How did you pick one problem that you want to go after and continue to stay with it, focus on that, and talk about that early discussion about with you and your co-founders, and how did you all come together? So over to you, Rajoshi. Maybe you want to introduce yourself, and then Shiv, and then I would love to kickstart this discussion.
Absolutely. Hi everyone, and really happy to be here. I'm Rajoshi, and I'm one of the founders of Hasura. Hasura is a company in sort of the data access infrastructure space. We're an open source product. We launched about 3 years ago, and it's been a pretty interesting journey since then. We just recently crossed 100 million downloads. Because of the open source nature, we've got sort of a global community of developers who use us, and we've seen traction from both indie developers as well as some of the largest enterprises. I'm looking forward to sharing some of our learnings with you all on this call. I'll let Shiv introduce himself and then kind of go into some of the questions that you asked, Yash.
All right. Hi, everyone. Yash, thanks for the opportunity. And my name is Shiv Agarwal. I did a startup. It was called Arkin back in 2013. It was acquired by VMware in 2016. So I'm still at VMware. I'm leading that same product in the business unit there. It was a great journey and a greatly successful acquisition as well by VMware. The product has done extremely well inside VMware. And in the past, I've been part of a few startups, and it's been a mix of startup and large companies, but mostly startups. And entrepreneur from heart, and graduated from IIT back in 90s, IIT Kanpur. That's my alma mater. And here I am today. So happy to share my learnings and experiences with you all.
Great. Maybe we can kickstart this discussion around, those early days of your journey. Why did you and how did you focus on one problem, and talk about that early days when you and your co-founders came together?
Sure. I think for us, for my co-founder and I, we actually met through my sister, who went to university with my co-founder, and we were both at a stage where we were looking to start up, and we met up and discussed a whole bunch of ideas, and just said that, okay, if we find something that we're both equally interested in, we'd kind of jump into it. And I think we were both itching to just get started, so we did a bunch of things. And at some stage, we sort of realized that the problem space that excited both of us was this whole space of the number of application development and how we can actually make application development faster and sort of increase that developer productivity. So that was the problem, but we had no idea to solve it. So when you kind of go back to your question of focus, so the problem, it was for us, that problem seemed like there's a huge business opportunity there, but exactly like how to solve the problem, that is kind of the place where, we went through quite a few, we went through a journey of discovery of that solution that could be, a loop, like an actual big business. So we kind of, we actually started off with a consulting business where we said that, we weren't sure what this making application development would look like. So let's just build a lot of applications, work with a lot of people in different businesses, in different industries and verticals. So we did that. We were both first-time entrepreneurs. So, it was like, that was us just sort of like getting our feet wet. We did that for about 3.5 years and built this, kept building a product that would kind of evolve and that we could use to make the stuff that we were building faster. And we reached a place where we were quite happy with, the speed at which we were churning out pretty serious, like production-ready, mission-critical applications. And then came a point when, our consulting contracts started getting larger, and we knew that it was taking us in a very different direction. And we kind of came back to that question of what did we really want to do? We wanted to build a product. So we took that step back and said, okay, let's now start a product company. And from the technology we built there, we started Hasura in 2017. So to tie back to your question, the problem was something we identified. The idea is something like the idea or sort of the approach to solve the problem is something that, we went about with, we just kept sort of like looking at and trying to figure out which was the approach or the direction which would sort of grow fast, which is something we could do given the startup, given our nature, given our resource constraints at that, at different stages, and, what was a big enough market for us to target. So that was a little bit of our journey.
Wonderful. Shiv?
Yeah, so our story is pretty interesting. Me and my co-founder, we actually go back all the way to IIT, and we have known each other for like 25 years at this point. And so it was, very natural coming together and, starting the company. We come from enterprise software backgrounds, more specifically networking and security, the same space in which companies like Cisco and VMware are. And we were at VMware at that time. So this is our second stint at VMware. And we could see some trends which are happening out there in the enterprise. And so when you see certain trends and then, you start talking to customers, you realize that there is an opportunity, to solve certain kind of problems. Then basically you have to do your homework that how big are those problems and, is there a real need, a burning need to solve those problems? Will the customer, pay once for your product once you solve those problems? That's the key. Start with some assumptions, but you need to continuously assess if those assumptions are still valid and the customer is still looking for a solution on a continuous basis. Otherwise, you adjust. But one thing about enterprise software is that the problems are hard, but they are sticky. So they don't go away that easily. Enterprises don't change their infrastructure and IT teams, on a daily, weekly basis. So unlike on the consumer side, so you get time to build the product.
Yeah.
So we had this great model where my co-founder was in US, I was in India. The problem was clear, the trend was there, and the key thing was we started working with 5 customers early on from day one, who helped continuously validate the problem as well as build out the solution. So that was the key, in enterprise software. Frankly, you identify some early customers, you work with them, and those become your first paying customers as well. And that's, as you will know, if you raise institutional funding round like Series A, getting to revenue quickly becomes a very important milestone for the company.
Absolutely. So, speaking of, a lot of things that you guys touched upon, I want to double click on a lot of those topics. You mentioned, this discovery in the early stages. You had a good idea about the problem, but you had to kind of, work with your early stage customers. And when you look at the two companies, right? So, you're going after sometimes, larger enterprises are using it, or you have a wide number of people who are trying to access it. And, your company cannot really be solving all problems for everybody, right? So, otherwise the product becomes too bloated. A sharp knife can cut easier than a blunt knife, right? And this is one thing that I've observed is, on one side, you have this burning desire to add every feature, and especially the more enterprises that you work with, the feature requests are always kind of piling on. And then you have to kind of go very, very sharp in kind of exactly one problem that you solve. How did you guys balance this? How did you avoid feature bloat? How were you ruthless in your prioritization? Making those intentional decisions. I want to hear about some stories or how did you go about it? And maybe there were some places where you guys were flexible also. Could you talk about those decisions that you had to do to get the right product without bloating bloating the product too wide?
Shiv, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, that's a problem, everyone faces, whether you are in a startup or in a large company, of feature bloat and, multiple priorities. I think the startup world, it's simpler and easier. You are resource constrained, right? You start with a small team. You have to build a minimum viable product that will get you to revenue. Because enterprise software takes a lot of resources to build eventually or to grow the team. So you need to start that, the revenue coming in. So this model of where we were engaged with, 5 customers early on, we truly honed down into what is that, use case that is common across these 5 customers, or the first set of use cases that if we solve for them, then they will pay for it, you have to be upfront with the customer that this is that set of things that you will build for them or the use case that you will deliver initially. And at that point, you do expect a PO from them, right? Now, as part of that, of course, you have to be a little bit flexible as you work with each customers. Each of those 5 customers in our case, that they really see the value in the product, right? And one thing that really helped was that, which is you define the end state, right? You define what is the customer trying to achieve, and you ensure that your team internally is also tuned into that, right? Sometimes engineering, can over-engineer the product, and engineers get excited. So you have to ensure that they are tuned into really that end state, those milestones, and you are able to hear the customer voice directly. Then you don't have to sell those things internally. It's not just the founder talking to customers. You have a small team, get them connected and closer to the customers. And customers like that, two-way communication, staying closer to the engineering team and all the big techies in the company, listening to them. So I think if you create this open communication, create a good end state, you can get to that first milestone without feature bloat.
Yeah, Rajoshi, I would love to hear your perspective, because in your case, you're selling to developers. There is no PO attached. It's hard to get to a PO from the developers. How was it different with you, and how did you go navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, when we the initial version of the product that that we built when we were in our consulting days was actually a fairly bloated product in itself. In the sense that we had a team of 50 people who were using this platform that we had built to ship applications really fast, and we had solved, sort of. Our solution was the entire tech stack, all the way from your APIs to your deployment. We had sort of this bundled platform, which was amazing because, we achieved what we wanted to in terms of developer productivity. And when we took this to market, we realized that it was a very opinionated stack, and there were too many decisions that a company had to make to pick us, unless you're an absolutely new company that is sort of like building everything on us, which meant that necessarily we were self-selecting for startups, and that means our success would be dependent on the on sort of the success of other startups, and that's a pretty like a risky kind of bet to take as like a startup yourself. So then we kind of started breaking this platform apart to sort of figure out which portion of the platform was going to solve one problem really well. And that problem was a meaty enough problem for us to go after and a meaty enough market for us to go after. That's kind of how we zoned in on the sort of data access piece. Because we sort of, it was a problem, like accessing data is something that's time consuming, that like 50 to 80% of the backend code that you're writing in an application is basically security accessing your data for building your application. So it was something that we knew was kind of like a problem that had a very wide scope. When we launched in the open source space, we optimized for developer experience, that anybody trying it out should be able to go from. So we were giving you instant API. So we optimized for that developer experience because, unlike Shiv's background, like we actually did not come from that enterprise tech background. We were kind of really going that bottom up journey because that's kind of what we knew we could do at that stage. This is like no sales, nothing, right? So we kind of we optimized for developer experience because there was a bunch of engineers building a product, and we were aware of the developer experience that we would like in other products. So we kind of optimized for that to make sure that we remove all hurdles to go from 0 to API in 30 seconds. When we launched with that, developers loved it, and that kind of kick-started the adoption for us. So in terms of, and when it's an open source product, like you get issues on GitHub all the time. There's people telling you about things, but like the problem space and the core thing that we were solving, that was very clear. And so then when we started getting our enterprise, we actually got to the PO stage from these developers, right? They started putting Hasura in production when we were in alpha product. And, we started having those conversations. And so, and we also had the community, we also had these startups who were building. So we did get pulled in lots of different directions because, based on the kind of people using it, the requirements of this core piece will be very different. You might want to add something parallel that makes your application development process easy. You might want to add something, like something that enterprise wants at that layer. So what we did was we were very clear that we wanted to be in the data access space. So anything else in the periphery that a bigger player has already solved very well, we did not take on that problem. We did integrations. We made sure that the slice of the layer stack that we were operating at, we were adding value there continuously rather than trying to make that space bigger. And that I think it worked out well in this stage because, you're with more innovation there, you're kind of building your moat as well and adding more value, and people get to integrate and you're not kind of giving them too many things to buy into. That was one. And in terms of your second question of what are the places where we made concessions? And I think in the early stages, that was support for us, because support not from a professional services from the support, but like consulting, and really like if people were willing to use our product, it was open source. This was pre-commercialization. If they were willing to use our product in a mission critical way, we were out there to support you, to make you successful. And that really gave us the learning to how we could go to the next step and build like our commercial offering around it. So that's kind of where we were very flexible, right? Like just make sure you're there for your customers at all the times. Like just exactly like what Shiv said, like, you're listening to your customers, you're working very closely with them. So that we did, and that really helped us sort of shape the next phase of our product as well.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. So I want to kind of, build on some of these topics that came about, right? So going into getting a PO business model focus. Shiv, you were building a enterprise sales product, and you're building a developer first open core, as you called it last time we spoke, Rajoshi. Could you talk about how did you narrow down how did you focus on these business models? Like could you talk about what experiments did you run? How was the first sale experience like? And because that is where a lot of the early companies that are that we are dealing with, they have the product, they have the MVP, but they're going after this first large sale, right? So, I would love to hear from you on how you narrowed the business model and how did you go about with that first sale? And then I have a couple of follow-up questions on that. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, in our case, it was enterprise software. You could go open source, you could build it bottom up, like Hasura did. You can go the partners route, you can go direct sales. The key thing is to understand in that space to the audience you are selling, to the persona, how do they buy, what they're comfortable with, because you don't want additional friction in the process, right? In our case, again, enterprise IT software, high touch product, highly priced, not cheap. So we knew we have to get some early wins and prove out the value, prove out the product market fit, prove out the the GTM. So we went with direct sales. And in a startup, the founders have to do the first few sales. So we didn't have a sales guy on day one. Now, one thing that, and we'll talk about the first deal that we did in a moment, but one thing we were flexible on is the pricing and the licensing model. See, in a startup, you have the opportunity to disrupt the business model as well, right? And when you start with an idea or a product, you may have fully vetted on the technology side, the use case, but the licensing and pricing of the product, what it should be and what works, what doesn't, I think you should be open to that. So don't tie yourself to a model, which we didn't do. Learn from the initial customers, the value that they see, how do they, what's the metric against which that value could be measured. We use our initial, 5 customers to help quantify that value, to understand, what price points work for them. In fact, we sold our product to those first 5 customers at different price points, 5 different price points, which is okay. And that's how we honed into what is the right model. And once we had that, once we knew that, this is working or it can be replicated, then you go and hire a sales guy, right? So that you can clearly tell them your vision, what your product does, what value it brings, and how you can sell it, So that's the model we followed. Again, most of the time in enterprise IT, you have to start with direct sales, and then of course, as you become bigger, you can have partners selling it. In our case, we had a strategic investment from Dell / VMware, and maybe down the discussions today we can talk about that, the value of that. But we also used the corporate as a channel for us to sell. But again, that doesn't happen on day one. You have to wait, till you really prove out and you show joint synergies with them.
Rajoshi, love to hear about the development.
Yeah, I think for us, when during that, we had sort of a year from when we launched the open source product to when we launched our commercial product. And during that time, we had our hypothesis, you're using our software to build products. And so we wanted to make sure that you can get successful building your product with open source Hasura, because that's what open source projects are about, right? So we were, but then we were listening very closely to our users, and we had this hypothesis that when you're putting this in production, when you're a company running mission critical software using Hasura, you're going to have other things around running Hasura, the operational aspects of running Hasura, the team aspects, the organizational aspects of running Hasura that we wanted to solve for you, right? So we started innovating on that layer, and we were speaking very closely to the folks in our community, companies who were starting to use it, to make sure that value was a tangible value. So that's kind of how we built our enterprise product, and the business model kind of came from there because it's open source. And then we have a cloud offering, which is the hosted model with all of these features as well that you get on the cloud version, and you can also deploy it as on-prem software. So that kind of, and we wanted to make sure that our hosted model was not just software that we were hosting, but we were adding enough value for our user from everything from the ease aspect of deploying it and scaling it to sort of your production, all the production ready requirements that you might have, so that it's not really, your choice is not about hosting Hasura yourself versus hosting Hasura and Hasura Cloud. You would want to host it on Hasura Cloud because of sort of the entire offering that we have. So that was kind of how the business model evolved because, of the open source choice. In terms of our first enterprise customer, that was actually very interesting. And if anyone listening in has an open source product, I mean, I think the one thing that that worked for us and I highly encourage folks to do is talk about it. Just talk about it. Be everywhere that you can possibly be. Write about it. You're doing something unique. Make sure that you're sharing what you're working on. Developers love reading about technology. There are lots of forums. So that writing about what you're working on, what is your insight, what are the innovations, these are things that you can do while you're building your product, and they have disproportionate impact. Like our first enterprise customer actually came from reading a blog post about how we wrote Hasura and came and pinged us on intercom. And to download Hasura, we don't get emails. We don't have emails of people who download Hasura. So we just made sure that anyway, if you wanted to contact us, you would know how to contact us. So they read the thing, had a little intercom chatbot, and said, hey, we'd like to chat. And this was some Fortune 500 healthcare company. So that's kind of how we started. I mean, that sale took a while to materialize, but and that was also we kept talking to them closely. But that's how I would say the first few sales kind of came through just that organic motion of making sure we're available to people when they want to talk to us. Because one thing with enterprises is that, at the end of the day, if you're running software in any mission critical sort of space, you kind of want to have somebody to reach out to, right? And so that was what worked for us pre-commercial product as well, where we were like, hey, talk to us, right? So that kind of motion really helped us sort of get our first few enterprise customers. And now we, our playbook has a few more things, but early it was just that Discord chat and, contact us on our website, and an intercom chatbot was just that. And just telling people all the time that, you can talk to us.
No, very interesting. This is kind of resonates with some of the lessons that, we've been kind of both learning and importing with our portfolio companies. One, always be experimenting. You have to build this kind of, as a culture within the company, you have to build this cycle of fast experimentation and fast learning. You cannot have just one, it has to be both operating very strongly with each other. Second, don't be, you have your tech, which is a differentiator, but there is also business model innovation, which is also an important part of innovation, which Shiv kind of alluded to. And third thing, don't shy away from professional services. There is one thing that you see early is that the stigma of, hey, you don't have to, always, early stage, you want to care about multiples, and I don't want to take on professional services, but customer service, customer success is very important in order to deliver that. Having a small percentage, 10 to 15% of professional services is okay. Don't shy away from that. So that's pretty consistent with how some of our companies are also learning every day. So finally, I think we may have about 3 to 4 minutes to close this one out. But it's been a riveting conversation. But I would love to learn about, your scale-up journey. How did you go about your, the scale-up round, as well as in the case of Shiv, you went through a successful exit. Could you talk about that journey to close out this discussion?
Sure. You want to go ahead, Rajoshi?
Yeah, sure. I think the visibility, again, I feel like I'm going back to that, but the kind of visibility from that open source, we're very product led, right? That was kind of where we put all our eggs were in the product basket, and then talking about what we were building basket. Those were our baskets. And so that sort of traction is very in the open, right? Our open source project being successful is something that was there to see. So, that was really helpful in us sort of raising. So our seed round was much harder than the subsequent rounds, because at that point, nobody really knew this market. Nobody knew what we were talking about. We were also prior to the exact version of the product that we have today. So that was the hardest round in terms of really being able to find the right set of people who understood what we were doing and were excited by that, what we were doing, right? But post that, I think that sort of because of the visible open space that we operate in. We've been lucky in that, like that developer tooling space in the enterprise, like an enterprise software that has a large community, is that space that like investors are tracking. So we had that inbound continuously for our subsequent rounds, and and obviously with each round kind of comes more responsibilities of us really growing, and like there are lots of open source projects who are extremely popular that have not found the business model, and that was something we've been very cognizant of, that it's not just about like the downloads and the stars on GitHub, and we really need to find that business model. So that's been our focus from day one, but that visibility definitely helps. And then we've kept our eyes, like we've made sure we know what is a vanity metric and what is like actually like sustainable business. So we did that background work, but so that when investors did come to us, we had things to say and numbers to show. But at least, in the open source space, I think that's something that we've learned. And the same thing that we do for developers, kind of work with the early investors as well. And then, being heads down, focusing on the right metrics really helps.
Shiv, do you want to talk about your exit journey and how that materialized very quickly? I think I'm getting some notifications that we're out of time, but maybe very quickly, 30 seconds.
Yeah. So scaling up is two things, right? Scaling the team and then scaling the business. So scaling the team, we had a great model. India was our center of excellence. That's important when you do a cross-border startup. India should not be like an offsite location. It should be an integral part. It should be like one company in two locations, right? So scaling the team was easy, and my co-founder was based in India. Scaling the business, we did a strategic partnership. We got some funding, corporate funding as part of our Series B, but we also did a resale agreement with them, and they really helped start getting traction in the market because they have credibility, right? Any large company like a Dell or a VMware, they have a lot of credibility with customers. When they talk about a startup or a product, it brings a lot of credibility, right? So because of the relationship that we had with them, the strategic partnership and the resale agreement for a year, at the end of the year, they clearly saw that the value in the product, in the team, and that with their sales force, which is 1,000 times bigger than the startup sales force, they could really scale up this business, right? And then culturally there was a fit, so we took the exit offer. But again, a lot of things, homework was done before that in terms of working with the acquirer and ensuring that this relationship is successful after the acquisition.
That's great. No, that's an amazing journey, and I think we are out of time, but we could have gone for another 20, 30 minutes with this amazing conversation. So, but thank you for taking the time and talking to us, because these are very important topics. A lot of the founders are going through the same journey, and having these shared with them makes a big difference. So really appreciate you guys taking the time and speaking to us today. Hopefully you can also mentor some of the up and coming startups as well. But congratulations on the tremendous success that you guys have had. And thanks once again. Thanks, Rajoshi and Shiv.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out. Happy to help in any way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lord.
Thank you.